Chapter 6. Corners. Fermez l'espace. Fermez la poche du kangourou. Il fait chaud. Maurice Blancard. Close space. Close the kangaroo's pouch. It's warm in there. Section 1. With nests and shells, I was quite obviously in the presence of transpositions of the function of the inhabiting. My aim was to study chimerical or crude types of intimacy, whether light and airy, like the nest in a tree, or symbolic of a life rigidly encrusted in stone, like the mollusk. Now I should like to turn my attention to the impressions of intimacy which, however short-lived or imaginary, have nevertheless a more human root, and do not need transposition. They lend themselves to a direct psychology, even if positive minds take them for so much idle musing. The point of departure of my reflections is the following. Every corner in a house, every angle in a room, every inch of secluded space in which we like to hide or withdraw into ourselves, is a symbol of solitude for the imagination. That is to say, it is the germ of a room or a house. The documents available in literary works are few, for the reason that this purely physical contraction into oneself already bears the mark of a certain negativism. Also, in many respects, a corner that is lived in tends to reject and restrain, even to hide, life. The corner becomes a negation of the universe. In one's corner, one does not talk to oneself. When we recall the hours we have spent in our corners, we remember above all silence, the silence of our thoughts. This being the case, why describe the geometry of such indigent solitude? Psychologists and, above all, metaphysicians will find these circuits of topoanalysis quite useless. They know how to observe uncommunicative natures directly. They do not need to have a sullen person in a corner described to them as cornered. But it is not easy to efface the factors of place. And every retreat on the part of the soul possesses, in my opinion, figures of havens. That most sordid of all havens, the corners, deserves to be examined. To withdraw into one's corner is undoubtedly a meager expression. But despite its meagerness, it has numerous images, some, perhaps, of great antiquity, images that are psychologically primitive. At times, the simpler the image, the vaster the dream. To begin with, the corner is a haven that ensures us of one of the things we prize most highly, immobility. It is the sure place, the place next to my immobility. The corner is a sort of half-box, part walls, part door. It will serve as an illustration for the dialectics of inside and outside, which I shall discuss in a later chapter. Consciousness of being at peace in one's corner produces a sense of immobility, and this, in turn, radiates immobility. An imaginary room rises up around our bodies, which think that they are well hidden when we take refuge in a corner. Already, the shadows are walls, a piece of furniture constitutes a barrier, hangings are a roof. But all of these images are over-imagined, so when we have to designate the space of our immobility by making it the space of our being. In L'état débauche, Noël Arnaud writes, Je suis l'espace où je suis. I am the space where I am. This is a great line, but nowhere can it be better appreciated than in the corner. In Mein Leben ohne mich, My Life Without Me, Rilke writes, Suddenly a room with its lamp appeared to me, was almost palpable in me. I was already a corner in it, but the shutters sensed me and closed. It would be hard to find a more felicitous way of saying that the corner is a chamber of being. Section 2. Let us take now an ambiguous text in which being becomes manifest at the very moment when it comes forth from its corner. Jean-Paul Sartre, writing on Baudelaire, quotes a sentence from Richard Hughes, A High Wind in Jamaica, that deserves lengthy commentary. Emily had been playing houses in a nook right in the bows. It is not this line, however, that Sartre discusses, but the following. And tiring of it, she was walking rather aimlessly aft, when it suddenly flashed into her mind that she was she. Before examining these thoughts from various angles, I shall point out that in all probability in the novel, they correspond to what we are obliged to call invented childhood, with which novels abound. For novelists often return to an invented childhood, which has not been experienced, to recount events whose naivete is also invented. This unreal past projected through literary means into a time that precedes the story often conceals the actuality of a daydream, which would assume all its phenomenological value if it were to be presented in really actual naivete. But the verbs to be and to write are hard to reconcile. And yet, as it is, the text quoted by Sartre is a valuable one, because it designates topo-analytically, that is, in terms of space and experience of outside and inside, the two directions that psychoanalysts refer to as introvert and extrovert. Before life, before the passions, in the very pattern of existence, the novelist encounters this duality. The lightning-like thought that the little girl in the story has found herself in herself, comes to her as she leaves her house. Here we have a cogito of emergence without our having been given the cogito of a being withdrawn into itself. The more or less sombre cogito of a being who first plays at making itself a Dutch stove like Descartes, a sort of chimerical home in a corner of a boat. The child has just discovered that she is herself in an explosion towards the outside, which is a reaction perhaps to certain concentrations in a corner of her being. For the recess in the boat is also a corner of being. But when she has explored the vast universe of the boat in the middle of the ocean, does she return to her little house? Now that she knows that she is herself, will she resume her game of playing houses? Will she return home? In other words, withdraw again into herself? One can undoubtedly become aware of existing by escaping from space. Here, however, the figure of being is related to a special concept. Therefore, the novelist should have given us the details of the inversion of a dream that lead from home to the universe in quest of being. And since this is invented childhood, fictionalized metaphysics, the author holds the key to both domains. He senses their correlation. No doubt he could have illustrated otherwise this sudden awareness of being. But since the house preceded the universe, we should be told her daydreams in it. As it is, the author has sacrificed, or perhaps suppressed, these corner daydreams and placed them in the category of children's games, by which he more or less admits that the real things of life are the exterior ones. But life in corners, and the universe itself withdrawn into a corner with the daydreamer, is a subject about which poets will have more to tell us. They will not hesitate to give us, or to give this daydream all its reality. Section 3. In the novel L'amoureuse initiation by the Lithuanian poet Ovid de Milosz, there is a passage in which the leading character, a cynically sincere figure who has forgotten nothing, is reminiscing. But these are not childhood memories. On the contrary, the entire work is set in the experienced present, and we are shown him in his palace, where he leads a fervent existence, setting aside certain corners to which he often repairs. As, for instance, that little dark corner between the fireplace and the oak chest where you used to hide when she went away. It should be noted that he did not wait for her in the vast palace, but in a corner reserved for gloomy waiting, where he could digest his anger at her faithlessness. With your bottom resting on the hard, cold marble floor, your blank gaze turned towards the make-believe sky of the ceiling, and in your hands a book with uncut pages, you spent many a delightfully sad hour there waiting, like the poor blockhead that you were. What a refuge for ambivalence. Here is a dreamer who is happy to be sad, content to be alone, waiting. In his corner he can meditate upon life and death, as befits the heights of passion. To live and die in this sentimental corner, you told yourself, yes, indeed, to live and die there. Why not, then, Monsieur de Pinamonte, you who so love dark, dusty little corners? And all who live in corners will come to confer life upon this image, multiplying the shades of being that characterize the corner dweller. For to great dreamers of corners and holes, nothing is ever empty. The dialectics of full and empty only correspond to two geometrical non-realities. The function of inhabiting constitutes the link between full and empty. A living creature fills an empty refuge, images inhabit, and all corners are haunted, if not inhabited. Miloz's corner dreamer, M. di Piemonte, in his, on the whole, spacious den between the chest and the fireplace, resumes his reminiscing. Here the meditative spider lives powerful and happy. The past shrivels up and all but appears like a frightened old ladybug. Ironic, cunning ladybug. Here the past can be recaptured and yet remain hidden from the learned spectacles of collectors of pretties. Under the poet's magic wand, one cannot help becoming a ladybug or gathering memories and dreams under the elytra of this roundest of animals. But how well our little earth ball of red life hid its ability to fly? It escapes from its spear as from a hole. Perhaps up in the blue sky, too, it experiences sudden awareness that it itself, like the little girl in Richard Hughes's novel. And we find it hard to stop dreaming before the spectacle of this little shell that suddenly starts to fly. Exchanges of animal and human life become frequent in Milos's novel. His cynical dreamer goes on here, in this corner between the chest and the fireplace. You find countless remedies for boredom, and an infinite number of things that deserve to occupy your mind for all time. The musty odor of the miniatures of 3 centuries ago, the secret meaning of the hieroglyphics in fly dung, the triumphal arc of that mouse hole, the frayed tapestry against your round, bony back is lolling, the gnawing noise of your heels on the marble, the powdery sound of your sneeze, and finally, the soul of all this old dust from corners forgotten by brooms. But except for such corner readers as ourselves, who will continue to read about all this dustiness, someone like Michel Leiris, perhaps, who tells of having picked up the dust from the cracks in the floor with a pin. But I repeat, not everybody will admit to these things. Yet in such daydreams as these, the past is very old indeed, for they reach into the great domain of the undated past. By allowing the imagination to wander through the crypts of memory without realizing it, we recapture the bemused life of the tiniest burrows in the house, in the almost animal shelter of dreams. But against this distant background, childhood returns. In his meditation corner, Milos's dream questions his conscience. The past rises to the level of the present, and the dreamer finds himself in tears because, already as a child, you liked the eaves of chateaux and corners of dusty old libraries, and you read avidly without understanding a word, falsely learned volumes of the privileges of the Dutch. Ah, you rascal! What delightful hours you used to pass in your rascality in those nostalgia-dredged nooks and corners of the Palazzo Merona. The time you squandered there, trying to get at the heart of things that had had their day. With what joy you changed yourself into an old shoe picked out of the gutter, saved from being swept out with the rubbish. Just here, we can come to an abrupt halt, break up the daydream, and lay aside our reading. For who is prepared to go beyond the spider, the ladybug, and the mouse, to a point of identification with things forgotten in a corner? But what kind of daydream is this that can be broken up? And why break it up for reasons of conscience or good taste, or through disdain for old things? Milos does not dream beyond it, and we share his dream of a corner that is the grave of a wooden doll, forgotten last century, in this corner of the room by some little girl. No doubt, one would have to sink into profound daydreaming to be moved by the vast museum of insignificant things. It is impossible to dream of an old house that is not the refuge of old things, its own, or that has been filled with old things as a result of the simplest craze of a collector of knickknacks. To restore their soul to corners, it is better to have an old slipper or a doll's head, like those that attract the meditations of Milos's dreamer. The mystery of things, the poet continues, little sensations of time, great voids of eternity, all infinity can be contained in this stone corner, between the fireplace and the oak chest. Where they are now, I ask you, all those marvelous, spidery delights of yours, those profound meditations on poor, dead little things. Then, from the depths of his corner, the dreamer remembers all the objects identified with solitude, objects that are memories of solitude which are betrayed by the mere fact of having been forgotten, abandoned in a corner. Remember the old lamp that greeted you from far away, through the window of your thoughts, its panes burned by suns of other years. From the depths of his corner, the dreamer sees an older house, a house in another land, thus making a synthesis of the childhood home and the dream home. The old objects question him. What will the friendly old lamp think of you during the lonely winter nights? What will the other objects think of you, the ones that were so kind, so fraternally kind to you? Was not their obscure fate closely united with your own? Motionless, mute things never forget. Melancholy and despised as they are, we confide in them that which is humblest and least suspected in the depths of ourselves. What a call to humility this dreamer heard in his corner! For the corner denies the palace, dust denies marble, and worn objects deny splendor and luxury. The dreamer in his corner wrote off the world in a detailed daydream that destroyed, one by one, all the objects in the world. Having crossed the countless little thresholds of the disorder of things that are reduced to dust, these souvenir objects, set in the past order, associated condensed motionless, with far distant voyages into a world that is no more. With Milhaud's, the dream penetrates so deeply into the past that it seems to attain a region beyond memory. All these things are far, far away. They no longer exist, and they never did exist. The past has lost all recollection to them. Look, seek and wonder, tremble. Already you yourself no longer have a past. Meditating upon certain passages of this work, one feels oneself carried away into a sort of antecedence of being, as though into the beyond of dreams. Section 4. In quoting this fragment by Milhaud, I have sought to present an unusually complete experience of a gloomy daydream, the daydream of a human being who sits motionless in his corner, where he finds a world grown old and worn. Incidentally, I should like to point out the power that an adjective acquires as soon as it is applied to life. A gloomy life or a gloomy person marks an entire universe with more than just a pervading coloration. Even things become crystallizations of sadness, regret, or nostalgia. And when a philosopher looks to poets, to a great poet like Milhaud, for lessons in how to individualize the world, he soon becomes convinced that the world is not so much a noun as an adjective. If we were to give the imagination its due in the philosophical systems of the universe, we should find, at their very source, an adjective. Indeed, to those who would want to find the essence of a world philosophy, one could give the following advice. Look for its adjective. Section 5. But let us resume contact with shorter daydreams, the kind that are attracted by detail or by features of reality which, at first, seem insignificant. People never tire of recalling that Leonardo da Vinci advised painters who lacked inspiration when faced with nature to contemplate with a reflective eye the crack in an old wall. For there is a map of the universe in the lines that time draws on these old walls. And each of us has seen a few lines on a ceiling that have appeared to chart a new continent. A poet knows all this, but in order to describe his own way a universe of this kind, created by chance on the confines of sketch and dream, he goes to live in it. He finds a corner where he can abide in this cracked ceiling world. Thus we see a poet take the hollow road of a piece of molding in order to reach his hut in the corner of a cornice. In his Poems l'autre moi, Poems to My Other Self, Pierre Albert Birot espouses, as they say, the curve that warms. Soon its mild warmth calls upon us to curl up under the covers. To begin with, Albert Birot slips into the molding. Je suis tout droit les milieux, que suivant tout droit le plafond. I follow the lines of the moldings which follow that of the ceiling. But if we listen to the design of things, we encounter an angle, a trap that retains the dreamer. A trap that detains the dreamer, rather. Mais il y a des angles d'où l'on ne peut plus sortir. But there are angles from which one cannot escape. Yet even in this prison there is peace. In these angles and corners, the dreamer would appear to enjoy the repose that divides being and non-being. He is the being of an unreality. Only an event can cast him out, and just here the poet adds, but a klaxon made me come out of the angle where I was beginning to die of an angel's dream. It is easy for a rhetorician to criticize a text like this. Indeed, the critical mind has every reason to reject such images, such idle musings. First of all, because they are not reasonable, because we do not live in corners of the ceiling while lolling in a comfortable bed, because a spider's web is not, as the poet says, drapery, and to be more personal, because an exaggerated image is bound to seem ridiculous to a philosopher who seeks to concentrate being in its center, and finds in a center of being a sort of unity of time, place, and action. Yes, but even when the criticisms of reason, the scorn of philosophy and poetic traditions unite to turn us from the poet's labyrinthine dreams, it remains nonetheless true that the poet has made a trap for dreamers out of his poem. As for me, I let myself be caught. I followed the molding. In an earlier chapter devoted to houses, I said that a house in an engraving may well incite a desire to live in it. We feel that we should like to live there between the very lines of the engraved drawing. At times, too, the phantasm that impels us to live in the corners comes into being by the grace of a mere drawing. But then, the grace of a curved line is not a simple Bergsonian movement with well-placed inflections. Nor is it merely a time that unreels. It is also habitable space harmoniously constituted. We are again indebted to Pierre Albert Biraud for an engraved corner, a lovely engraving in terms of literature. Et voici que je suis devenu un dessin dormant. Volutes sentimentales. Enroulement de spirales. Surface organisée en noir et blanc. Et pourtant, je viens de m'entendre respirer. Et c'est bien un dessin. Et c'est bien moi. So now I have become a decorative drawing, sentimental scrolls, coiling spirals, an organized surface in black and white. And yet I have just heard myself breathe. Is it really a drawing? Is it really I? Here it is as though the spiral greeted us with clasped hands. However, the drawing is more effective for what it encloses than for what it exfoliates. The poet feels this when he goes to live in the loop of a scroll, to seek warmth in the quiet life in the arms of a curve. The intellectualist philosopher who wants to hold words to their precise meaning and uses them as countless little tools of clear thinking is bound to be surprised by the poet's daring. And yet a syncretism of sensitivity keeps the words from crystallizing into perfect solids. Unexpected adjectives collect about the focal meaning of the noun. A new environment allows the word to enter not only into one's thoughts, but also into one's daydreams. Language dreams. The critical mind can do nothing about this, for it is a poetic fact that a dreamer can write of a curve that is warm. But does anyone think that Bergson did not exceed meaning when he attributed grace to curves and, no doubt, inflexibility to straight lines? Why is it worse for us to say that an angle is cold and a curve warm? That the curve comes to us and the oversharp angle rejects us? That the angle is masculine and the curve feminine? A modicum of quality changes everything. The grace of a curve is an invitation to remain. We cannot break away from it without hoping to return, for the beloved curve has nest-like powers. It incites us to possession. It is a curved corner, inhabited geometry. Here we have attained a minimum of refuge, in the highly simplified pattern of a daydream of repose. But only the dreamer who curls up in contemplation of loops understands these simple joys of delineated repose. No doubt it is very rash on the part of the writer to accumulate, in the final pages of a chapter, disconnected ideas, images that only live in a single detail, and convictions, however sincere, which only last for an instant. But what else can be done by a phenomenologist who wants to brave a teeming imagination, and for whom, frequently, a single word is a germ of a dream? When we read the works of a great word dreamer like Michel Léry, particularly in his Bifures, we find ourselves experiencing in words, on the inside of words, secret movements of our own. Like friendship, words sometimes swell at the dreamer's will in the loop of a syllable, while in other words, everything is calm, tight. Even as a sober man, as Joseph Joubert recognizes the intimate repose of words when he speaks of certain ideas rather curiously as huts. Words, I often imagine this, are little houses, each with its cellar and garret. Common sense lives on the ground floor, always ready to engage in a foreign commerce, on the same level as others, as the passers-by, who are never dreamers. To upstairs in the word house is to withdraw, step by step, while to go down to the cellar is to dream. It is to losing oneself in the distant corridors of an obscure etymology, looking for treasures that cannot be found in words. To mount and descend into the words themselves, this is a poet's life. To mount too high or to descend too low is allowed in the case of poets, who bring earth and sky together. Must the philosopher alone be condemned by his peers to always live on the ground floor?